Good morning. It is truly a gift to be here today. When I was thinking about what it takes, I started reflecting back on my career and even how I ended up where I'm at. And what I've discovered is that it truly takes being uncomfortable. And for me, it's meant sleeping on an Aero mattress for the past 90 days since I've made a transition from Chicago to Oakland. And that's not a pretty sight when you're 6'3". But it's working out. My stuff will be arriving soon, and I'll be all right. But what it takes is it is the question I think that we need to ask ourselves. And the more I thought about it, I thought that I could best represent what it takes by talking about it in two ways. The first is personal commitment, and the second in terms of what institutions must do to support the work of Neighborhood House. I think what yesterday told me was this: Neighborhood House knows how to do the work. It absolutely knows how to do this work. It is absolutely poised to go to scale, meaning that it can serve thousands more children. And it is a complex organization that needs to be understood in all of its complexity and invested in. And so I'm going to start by talking about the first thing, the personal commitment. It's amazing to think that I've been in this field for 20 years now. And in the first 20 years, when I started, I was unreasonable. I was idealistic. I was full of hopes and dreams. I thought I was going to change the world. And then I went and got a job. And fortunately, I got a job at a place that nurtured me and mentored me and showed me how you do this civic work. And so if you had came to a particular city in the 90s and asked who was some of those up-and-comers, you know, the magazines that always do the 40 under 40 and all those things, I would have always been in that list, not because of who I was, but because of my proximity to power and money from where I worked. And I got restless there. I didn't know how to just accept that I had it good. And so I went to work for an initiative that was started by community leaders to solve a particular problem: youth problems in the after-school hours. And what usually happens, I heard the term yesterday called Seattle nice. Well, where I came from, Kansas City, we called it Kansas City nice. And what that usually meant is when you got disillusioned with the work, even though you were the investors in it, you kind of never terminated the relationship. You kind of just slowly exited. But everyone was still at the table asking the question, why is this agency $700,000 in debt? I saw that as an opportunity. I was young, I was restless at the foundation, I was ready to go lead something, change the world. So I asked, could I be loaned out to go do this? That was a big mistake. I was under 30 at this time. I was making nearly $100,000 in Kansas City, so that was pretty good for me, especially coming from where I came from. I don't think my parents made over $30,000 their entire life a year. And so I really had it good. I had access to relationships and power and money and folks who would do all sorts of things for me if I just stayed in the role of a good director at a foundation. But that wasn't good enough. So I went to turn this agency around, and I did. We got it out of the debt, $700,000 in 30 days. We moved its office, and we had the audacity to believe that we were going to do something called accountability. And that the standard that we would use is, if it's not good enough for our children, it's not good enough. We were no longer going to intellectualize. We were no longer going to use terms like change takes time. We were going to ask the most simply elegant question that automatically brings urgency, which is, would we put our children and grandchildren in products that perform this way? And when we asked that question and then set out to answer it, we discovered that the answer was no. The problem for me was that answering that question meant that I was violating the entire culture of a city that had a wonderful relationship. I give you money, I provide a service, I give you Kansas City Another Year awards, and we have a cozy relationship. And now I'm calling into question these 20 and 30-year relationships. And I don't have any relationships because I'm new on the scene. Then we issue the report. And in the spirit of transparency, my board was excited about the report that we issued that said these programs, while they've been around for many years in the community, that they're good, but they're not working. my board didn't want to issue the report publicly. And so I had to make my first choice in terms of where does my leadership reside. And I decided that my leadership resided in the community. So I issued the report publicly outside of my board. Strike one. So the report appears in the paper with the framing questions of would you put your children or grandchildren in it. The report lays out things, and it had these little McAfee-isms on the side that children will not play basketball to high-paying jobs with wages and benefits and things like that to try to bring home the point. The board hung with me for that one. But then we were to go after a sustainable financing package. Many of you all hear these terms, sustainability and how we're going to sustain this work. It's a little bit more than saying the words. And so we had put together this package to go and get a sales tax. Here you guys do that. You have a levy that is phenomenal. And so I applaud you for your leadership in that. Well, in Kansas City, it resulted in me getting fired trying to do that. So we got right to the place where we did all the politics. We had put the plan together. We were ready to do the levy. And the board simply says they did not want to do that. And I would not stop pushing. So in the typical Kansas City nice fashion, the world got quiet around me. There was no screaming. There was just no yelling. It was just quiet. And so at this time, my mentor was also the board of this organization. And so I called her one day and I asked her, could we talk so I could find out what's going on, because I knew silence was not good. I had watched and learned very well. And so she looked me in my eye and she says, Michael, I'll get back in touch with you. And so I knew what that meant when I saw her look. So I immediately got up, went to the office, and I told my colleagues that I am getting ready to be fired. And it's been a great ride, and I'll leave. 3 o'clock, I get a call to come down to a major bank. They call me into the boardroom, and they simply say, we question your judgment, and you need to go. Now, at this time, this was devastating, because if any of you all have careers where your work is your life, it's not like you work. I've had the luxury of not having to work, but having a ball. If Angela knew how much fun I was having right now, I wonder what she would really think, because this is not work to me. This is my passion and my vocation. And at that moment, I cannot tell you the choice I had to make, but I'm so glad I had to make it. The choice at that point was I could have corrected everything. I could have got back in my role of being a nice up-and-comer who would say the right things, behave the right way, and just get with the program of incrementalism and gradualism. And maybe things would have been okay, maybe not, but I chose not to do that. And at the time, we were talking about doing the exact same things that Promised Neighborhoods represents. At that time, I had been to Jeff Canada's shop in Harlem, and I had gotten inspired by it. Then it was just called Beacon Schools and Reedland Centers, long before we got to this place. And so I thought I was going to go back and do this in Kansas City. So Jeff got me fired. Then he hires me here. That's the irony of it all. And it was at that moment that I discovered that, wow, I have a choice to make. Will I use my voice really on behalf of the children and families, or will I use my voice to sustain my position in life? That was a wonderful opportunity for me, because it really called into question what I believed in, because I had to make a choice. Do I want to be loved by civic leadership, or do I want to do the work? I made the choice to do the work. The choice cost me my job. So then I had to make a choice to leave Kansas City. I packed my stuff up and drove to D.C. And I drove to D.C. to start all over. I got my doctorate out there and started trying to work, but the world is very small. And so every time I tried to work, folks started calling. Don't play with Michael, he's too hot. And I'm telling you this story because as you think about doing Neighborhood House, you're going to have young leaders who come into the pipeline who are passionate, and it's amazing how we can stifle that energy. But at the same time, we have expectations for change and immediacy. And I'm asking you just to consider the implications of having people around you who don't necessarily share the dominant logic of the group and what that means. That is quite powerful. It is quite powerful what can happen if you embrace that energy. Losing my job was the best thing, because once it codified for me what I wanted to do with my life. I ended up going to Chicago to work with HUD. And so HUD brought me to the second test of my personal commitment. The first was What am I going to stand for? HUD represented really building my family out and trying to hunker down and licking my wounds from being ran out of a town. At HUD, I was able to do good work, but it wasn't transformative work. It was good work. And so when I got this call after 11 years at HUD, I was quite comfortable. I wasn't even looking for this position. I get the call to consider talking about this position. And I was quite indifferent because part of me still had the frame of what had happened to me. And the other part was weighing the fact that I had developed a nice life for myself. I had met my wife, daughter's getting ready to graduate from college soon. I've got the house, I've got the car, I've got all of these things. Very stable. So I go to New York to interview, and I said, well, you know what? Let me just talk a bunch of craziness to see if they're serious. I need to test for commitment. So I'm just dreaming with this recruiter. I'm just talking and just talking. I'm so far out there. I'm thinking this is not going to work. She takes about 7 pages of notes. I call my wife and I say, I don't think this worked. So I get the interview to come to Oakland to interview with Angela and her team. And I thought, well, let me test for commitment again. Let me write it down, just in case they didn't get it. So I wrote down what I thought would be my strategic framework for moving forward if you hired me, just so we will be clear, so that if you fire me this time, at least I've done more prep work on the front end. They bought it. And as I was looking in their eyes, the excitement was they weren't afraid. They were getting it. But the problem for me was this now. Did I want to do good work? Did I want to be transformative? Did I want to live in a place of fear and vulnerability? Or do I want to stay comfortable? Those were the choices that I had to make now. And I went back and forth, and I went back and forth with this issue. I started to engage my friends, and the things that I'll tell you is this, because what happened with my friends and me trying to make my decision often happens in our community context when we're making decisions. My friends loved me to death. They were the worst advisors I ever had. When I talked to my friends said to me, you've got this great 6-figure federal job. Why would you leave it? You're known at HUD. You're going to move at HUD. Things are happening. HUD's moving. You're going to do great work. What about your condo? What about your car? How would you move? It was very tactical, very material, all in the name of being very caring and loving. Folks, it was the Casey Fellowship that gave me the strength to make the decision. The Casey Fellowship looks to bring folks together to do this work. And the fellows looked at me and said, you're playing beneath yourself. If you don't take the position, then you lose almost the right to talk about it's not being done right. So I'm getting that voice, which was quite powerful. It was the voice that helped me. But it was also my wife's voice, because as only a wife can do. My wife had found some articles that my mother had given her when I was in my 20s, and the articles were talking about this work and what was required. And somehow those articles were nested in a book by Eckhart Tolle called The Purpose of Now. And I don't know why I picked the book up and the articles fell out. But she really helped me understand that what it represented was that if I didn't take this opportunity, that really I was really just so far away from doing what I was put on this earth to do. And that I really had to live with that. But she didn't say it nicely. She said it in a way that for the first time out of all the time, my wife is very quiet. And so when she speaks, I listen. But the way she spoke this time, it hurt. And it hurt not because she said it with any aggression or whatever, but she hit me at the core of my being. And she saw something in me that I had kind of packed away and decided that I wasn't going to allow to manifest anymore, which was my voice, which was my heart and my passion. And what she was calling me to do was to connect my heart with my commitment. She was asking me to connect my heart with my commitment, folks. And so what that meant was I packed up. She's still in Chicago, coming out in June, and I've been sleeping on an Aero mattress. But I'm doing the right work right now. And so that personal commitment is about, 1, figuring out what you stand for, but 2, being in a space of being uncomfortable, being in a place where you are afraid and embracing that fear. I can tell you right now, all the easy work has been done, quite frankly. There's a powerful book out there called Voices from the Field that describes this work from the settlement house days all the way to where we're at today. All the easy stuff has been done. The tough conversations we have to have now. You can't embark on what Neighborhood House is going to do, and we all want to be nice. We all want to believe the same thing. We all don't want to be comfortable. And I'm telling you this because when I was getting fired from Kansas City, one of my board members said something that was very insightful, but also very limiting when I think about it now. He said, you know, Michael, your problem is you don't understand that board members don't serve on boards to feel bad. And man, if you knew the words that came out of my mouth. He was absolutely right, though, in many cases. He was absolutely right. Board members do not serve on boards to feel bad. They have other lives, right? It's far more complex. But the reality is this. Our children shouldn't live in communities where they feel bad either, where they don't have access to decent and affordable housing, where they don't have access to the same supports that you and I have for our own children, where they don't have people that will manifest the same urgency. When something's not right for your children and my child, we don't talk about change processes and 5-year strategic plans and development processes and what we don't have. We expect immediacy now, do we not? Folks, that's the urgency we have to lead this change. All the intellectualization is over. It is about the leadership voice that will manifest in each and every one of us now. The personal commitment that we will have to lead a change that ensures that when we say all children and families deserve an equitable opportunity to reach their full potential, that those are not just words, but that they first manifest themselves in each of us. And then secondly, after they manifest themselves in each of us, that they manifest themselves in our organizations. And in our organizations is really where the second part of what I want to talk about comes from. Neighborhood House does not need anyone else to tell it what to do. It needs partners to remove the barriers, the complex barriers to the work, the housing barriers, the zoning barriers, the access to transportation barriers, the access to jobs barriers. Those are not things that will necessarily get solved in a grant. Those are the things that get resolved when we bring our leadership voice through an institution to move mountains, folks. And that's the work that will be challenging and fearful because it will require many of us to behave radically different than the way the institutions have behaved in the past. Take foundations. Who will be the first foundation that says we're going to fund for 5 years and we're going to fund major grants? You're doing a Promised Neighborhoods. You're going to ensure 1,200 children have opportunities. Let's think about what that costs. And then when the staff of Neighborhood House does the excellent work to say, I can show you the business plan of how we'll get there, and it costs us $3 to $5 million a year, will you be the program officer that gives them a $25,000 grant for 3 years? Or will you be the program officer that says, you know what? Not only am I going to give you $500 million over the next 3 years, I'm also going to bring the leadership voice of my board to removing the barriers at the city, at the county, at the state, so that we can design policies that match what we're doing on the ground. That's the leadership. That's the opportunity here, folks. That's the opportunity to behave differently, to be in the rooms where we've all learned to play a particular role, to behave a particular way, and see the opportunity in being transformative or not. And right now, I can tell you, we need to place no judgment on whether we want to do good work or transformative work. They both can exist simultaneously, but I can tell you, if it's our children, we do transformative work. If it's our children, we do transformative work. We do immediate work. We do it with the intensity required to get the change or the outcome that we want. Children all across America need that opportunity right now. If you look at the statistics, we're at a place where there's huge wealth gaps, there's huge income disparity gaps, we're still racially segregated, and we have more poverty today than we had since we started taking the census and documenting it. And at the same time, by 2015, the majority of young people will be of color. It's less about a moral issue right now and about the strength of our nation and how will we prepare all children to be able to compete in this society. If you look at the new census data coming out, it tells a powerful story. It tells the powerful story of what will we do with our leadership. Will we lead? Or will we just issue another report that says, ain't it awful? We have a wide range of options. But what I saw yesterday and today is a community that totally gets it. A community that has the supports and the resources and the leadership right here that is quite unique from places that I've been. And all we have to think about is, what does it take in the context of seeing your child in someone else's child and having the audacity to make the personal commitment, and then taking your personal commitment and marrying it with the institutional role that you play out to make a difference in this community. That is the most phenomenal work that it can happen. It is, in fact, why I left Chicago. It is, in fact, why I'm doing this work. It is, in fact, why I am so glad I got reconnected to my younger self. A younger self that refused to accept the idea that people had to live in poverty, that people had to live in poor housing, that people could not be educated, that it was hopeless. I had lost that voice. I had lost that voice at HUD. And I had settled for just doing good work, getting the money out the door, serving out the compliance function, and occasionally helping folks. I had lost that voice. And I can tell you, it is absolutely phenomenal when you are dancing on the edge of the roof and you don't care whether you get fired or not. You don't, because the work is the right work, folks. And I can tell you, and I'm inviting you, to liberate yourself within your own comfort, within your own role, to think about, what does personal commitment look like for you? And then what would happen if you went back in your organization and you led in such a way that you were actually afraid of something? What would happen if you actually went back and led in your organization in such a way that you were actually afraid of saying something? You were actually afraid to dissent. You were actually afraid to challenge to a better vision. You were actually afraid to allow your passions to emerge around other folks. Imagine the work that we could do. I can tell you, if you abandon yourself to the strengths of others, you'll find your way. I found my way through the Casey Fellowship, giving me that voice. Hayo Kim is one of my fellows here. Thank you for getting me out here to be totally vulnerable. But I also found that voice in a wife that was supportive, that said, you know what, Michael? Because quite frankly, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. But someone who could look at you and say, you know, really, I would not be here. You know, to have a partner that will look you in the eye and say, you know what, this is beyond a job. This is your vocation. And what do we need to do to make that happen? That's how we need to support each other. So as I close here, I will tell you this. You've got an institution in Neighborhood House that is uniquely positioned, and in many cases, more positioned than folks who got money through Promised Neighborhoods to take up this work. More ready, more institutionally stronger, more community supports to take this work up. And so I invite you, as you think about what does the Promised Neighborhood look like in High Point, to lead the nation in showing us what it looks like to lead transformatively, to embrace the fear of what it means to help folks who don't have voice in this work. And then to do what Dr. King said when he said, I refuse to accept the idea that the isness of man's present nature makes him morally incapable of reaching for the oughtness that forever confronts him. Let's think about how we ought to behave on behalf of children and families. Not what's possible, but how we ought to behave. Because when we think about what's possible, we do the bare minimum. No longer think about what's possible or what's reasonable with the resources that we have. Move to thinking about what we ought to do and see what happens. I thank you for allowing me to join you today. It's been a wonderful gift to come to Seattle to see Neighborhood House. There's few places that I go that my spirit is just immensely uplifted, and this is one of those places. So thank you very much.